Clara Matthews stared at the ceiling fan as it rotated lazily above her bed, its gentle whirring failing to drown out the memories that haunted her sleepless nights. Outside, the summer heat pressed against the windows of their suburban home in Pinewood, a small town nestled in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. 3 years had passed since her twin sons disappeared. 3 years of unanswered questions, of shifting from desperate hope to crushing despair. And back again. "You should try to sleep," Robert said softly, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Her husband's voice carried the same weariness that had aged him beyond his years. "I was thinking about that morning," Clara replied, "the last time we saw them." The morning had been ordinary, painfully ordinary in retrospect. Lucas and Daniel, with their matching backpacks and different-colored sneakers, blue for Lucas, red for Daniel, had climbed into the car without fuss. The boys had been excited about spending 2 weeks at Uncle Ray's farm, a sprawling property that had been in the family for generations. It was their first visit. "It's just for 2 weeks," Robert had assured Clara as she fretted over their packing. "Ray may be a bit eccentric, but he's family." Eccentric was a polite way of describing Raymond Matthews. Ray had retreated from modern society after returning from military service, settling in the isolated farmhouse he'd inherited. He rarely attended family gatherings and seemed increasingly disconnected from the world, having sworn off cell phones, internet, and most technology. The farm was nearly 20 miles from the nearest town, with spotty reception and neighbors few and far between. Clara had hesitated about sending the boys, but Robert insisted it would be good for them. Some fresh air and space to run around, no video games, no social media, just like when we were kids. The memory turned bitter in Clara's mind. When the call came 10 days later, she'd been preparing dinner, chopping vegetables while humming along to the radio. "Mrs. Matthews," the unfamiliar voice belonged to Sheriff Donovan. "I'm afraid there's been an incident at your brother-in-law's property." The vegetables had remained half-chopped on the cutting board as Clara's world collapsed. According to Ray, the boys had gone exploring in the nearby woods after lunch. When they didn't return by dinner, he'd searched the immediate area before driving to the nearest phone to call the police. The search had been extensive. Law enforcement from 3 counties, volunteers, helicopters, dogs. They combed the dense woods, the fields, the neighboring properties. Clara and Robert had stayed at a motel in town, barely sleeping, joining the search parties each day until their feet blistered and their voices grew hoarse from calling their sons' names. No trace of the twins was ever found. No footprints leading away from the property. No sightings by neighbors, no evidence of foul play. The boys had simply vanished. Ray's demeanor throughout had been strange, distant, and unsettlingly calm. He answered questions mechanically, repeating the same story without variation. The boys had been playing near the old barn after lunch. He'd been working on his tractor. When he finished his work, they were gone. He assumed they were exploring. When they didn't come back, he looked for them. No, he didn't hear anything unusual. No, there had been no strangers in the area. "I think he knows something," Clara whispered now, turning to face Robert in the darkness. "I've always thought so," Robert sighed. This conversation had circled between them countless times. The police questioned him extensively, Clara. There was nothing to suggest. "A mother knows," she interrupted, the familiar anger rising. "You've seen how he acts around us now. He can barely look us in the eye." After 6 months, the active search had been scaled back. After a year, the case had gone cold. The police maintained several theories. The boys had gotten lost in the woods and succumbed to the elements. Though no remains were found, they had been taken by someone passing through the area, or they had run away. Though this seemed implausible given their age and the remote location, Clara pushed herself up and switched on the bedside lamp. Sleep was futile tonight. "I'm going to make some tea," she said, pulling on her robe. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Once filled with the sounds of boyish laughter and racing footsteps, now the silence hung heavy in every room. Clara moved through the kitchen mechanically, filling the kettle, reaching for a mug. Her gaze drifted to the refrigerator door, where photos of Lucas and Daniel smiled back at her. Their final school portraits. Lucas, with his hair neatly combed, a small dimple in his right cheek. Daniel, with his characteristic crooked smile, his hair perpetually tousled, despite Clara's efforts that morning. Two faces so similar yet distinct to a mother who knew every freckle, every expression. The kettle whistled, jolting Clara from her reverie. As she poured the steaming water over the tea bag, she heard the soft thud of something hitting the front door. She froze, listening. It wasn't the newspaper, far too early, and the sound was too light for a package. Setting down the kettle, Clara moved cautiously to the entrance. Through the small window beside the door, she could see no one on the porch. She unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open, peering into the pre-dawn darkness. There, on the welcome mat, lay a plain white envelope. Clara's hand trembled as she reached for the envelope. The porch was empty, the street silent and dark. She stepped outside, scanning the shadows for movement, but saw nothing, just the familiar silhouettes of suburban homes and the distant glow of a streetlight. Who could have delivered this at such an hour? And why simply drop it rather than ring the doorbell? Back inside, she turned the envelope over in her hands. It was plain white, unremarkable, with no return address. Most striking was the absence of a postmark or stamp. This hadn't come through the mail. On the front, written in neat block letters, was simply Matthews. "Robert," Clara called, her voice barely above a whisper. When there was no response, she called louder, urgency rising in her throat. "Robert?" She heard the creak of their bedroom floor, and moments later, her husband appeared at the top of the stairs, hair disheveled, eyes squinting against the light. "What is it?" he asked, then noticed the envelope in her hands. "What's that?" "Someone just left it at the door," she replied. "Just now." Robert descended the stairs quickly, fully alert now. "Did you see who?" Clara shook her head. "I heard something hit the door. By the time I looked, there was no one there." They moved to the kitchen table, where Clara carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, folded once. As she unfolded it, she gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The handwriting was unmistakable. The slightly wobbly letters, the way the E's were formed with an extra loop. She had seen it countless times on homework assignments and birthday cards. "It's from them," she whispered, tears forming instantly. "Robert, it's Daniel's handwriting." Robert took the paper with unsteady hands, his face draining of color as he read the short message. "We are okay. Don't trust him." 5 words. 5 simple words that shattered 3 years of agonizing uncertainty. The boys were alive, or at least they had been when this note was written. But the warning sent a chill through Clara's body. Don't trust him. Him who? Ray. Someone else. "This could be a cruel prank," Robert said cautiously, though his voice betrayed his own desperate hope. "Someone could have found their schoolwork, copied the handwriting." Clara shook her head vehemently. "No, look at how he forms his letters. That little curl on the K, that's Daniel. I know my son's handwriting." They sat in stunned silence, the implications washing over them. If the twins were alive, where had they been for 3 years? Why hadn't they come home? And why this cryptic warning now? "We need to call Detective Mercer," Robert said finally, reaching for his phone. "No," Clara said sharply, surprising herself with the force of her response. "Not yet." Robert looked at her questioningly. "Clara, this is evidence in a missing persons case. We have to—" "And what did the police do for us before?" she interrupted, sudden anger flaring. "They searched for 2 weeks, questioned Ray once, and then what? Filed it away as another cold case. They told us to prepare for the worst, remember? That's not fair. They did everything they could." "Well, it wasn't enough," Clara said, clutching the letter to her chest. "This is the first real lead we've had in 3 years, and I'm not handing it over just so they can mishandle it again." "What are you suggesting?" Clara took a deep breath, her mind racing ahead. "I want to go to Ray's farm. Today. I want to look around ourselves." Robert's expression shifted from surprise to concern. Clara, we've been through this. The police searched every inch of that property multiple times. But that was 3 years ago, she countered, and they were looking for boys who were lost or, she couldn't bring herself to say the word, bodies. This letter changes everything. Someone kept our sons somewhere. Someone knows something, and Ray is the only real connection we have. And if it is Ray? If he's dangerous? Robert asked quietly. Have you considered that? Clara had. The thought had gnawed at her for years, that her brother-in-law might know more than he'd admitted, might even be responsible. But she'd never voiced these suspicions fully, knowing how it would hurt Robert to suspect his own brother. That's why we go together, she said firmly. And we don't confront him directly. We just observe, talk to neighbors again, look for anything that might have changed. Robert ran a hand through his hair. Conflicted. The letter says don't trust him. If that means Ray and he is involved, showing up might put the boys in more danger. Clara hadn't considered that angle. The possibility that their presence might somehow make things worse was unbearable. But sitting here doing nothing was equally impossible. Then we'll be careful, she insisted. We won't let Ray know why we're really there. Outside, the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the horizon. Clara stood and moved to the window, watching as the street slowly emerged from darkness. Somewhere, her sons were alive. The thought filled her with a fierce determination that pushed aside 3 years of grief and helplessness. I need coffee, Robert sighed, acknowledging his wife's resolve without fully agreeing to it. And we need to think this through more carefully. As Robert busied himself with the coffee maker, Clara studied the letter again. There was something odd about it beyond the cryptic message. The paper was common notebook paper, but it looked fresh, not worn, as if it had been carried for a distance. And how had it arrived at their doorstep? Who had delivered it? And why in the pre-dawn hours? We should check the security cameras, Clara said suddenly, remembering the system they'd installed after the boys disappeared, partly for safety, partly in the desperate hope that the twins might somehow find their way home. Robert nodded, setting down coffee mugs and retrieving his laptop. A few clicks brought up the security system interface, and he navigated to the footage from the front porch camera. They huddled together, watching the screen intently as Robert rewound the footage to shortly before Clara had heard the sound at the door. At 4:37 a.m., the camera captured a figure approaching the house, slender, of average height, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over their face. The person moved with purpose but caution, glancing around once before quickly placing the envelope on the welcome mat. Then, instead of retreating down the walkway, the figure moved laterally, disappearing from the camera's view along the side of the house. "Can you see their face?" Clara asked, leaning closer to the screen. Robert shook his head. "The hood's too low, and they're keeping their head down." "Play it again," Clara insisted. There was something about the figure's movement, something familiar that tugged at her memory. As they watched the clip a second time, Clara's breath caught. "The way they walk," she whispered. "Robert, look at how they walk." "Você está certo e peço desculpas pelo erro. O capítulo 3 realmente ultrapassou o limite de 5.000, 6.000 caracteres. Aqui está o capítulo 3 revisado, mantendo-se dentro do limite solicitado. Chapter 3. The Return. Robert leaned closer to the screen, studying the figure's gait. There was indeed something distinctive about it, a slight hesitation before each step with the right foot. His eyes widened as recognition dawned. "Ray!" he breathed. "He's had that limp since his military days." Clara felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. "It's him! After all this time, he comes here in the middle of the night, leaves this note and disappears. Why not just talk to us? Unless he's not supposed to be here," Robert finished her thought. "Unless someone is watching him, too." The implications hung heavy between them. If Ray had delivered the note, a note warning them not to trust him, was he warning them about himself or someone else? And why now, after 3 years of silence? "We need to go," Clara said decisively, pushing away from the table. "Not just to the farm. We need to follow him now, before he gets too far." Robert hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I'll get dressed. You check if his truck is still in the area." 10 minutes later, They were in Robert's SUV, driving slowly through their neighborhood. Ray's distinctive blue pickup was nowhere to be seen. They expanded their search to nearby streets, then to the main road leading out of town, but found nothing. He could have parked anywhere, Robert said, frustration evident in his voice. Or maybe it wasn't him at all. Clara stared out the window, mind racing. He would have come from the farm. That's nearly 3 hours away. He wouldn't have made that drive just to drop off a note and immediately head back. A motel, then, Robert suggested. There are only 2 in town. They checked both locations. At the second, a tired desk clerk confirmed that a Raymond Matthews had checked in the previous evening. Left about an hour ago, though, she added. Paid cash for 1 night. Back in the car, Clara felt simultaneous disappointment and determination. He's heading back to the farm. That's where we need to go. The drive to Ray's property was tense and largely silent. The summer landscape blurred past, lush green fields giving way to denser woodland as they left the suburbs behind. Clara clutched the letter in her hand, reading and rereading the 5 words until they burned in her mind. "What will we say when we get there?" Robert asked eventually. "We can't just accuse him. We say we were driving through the area, that the anniversary of the disappearance is coming up, and we wanted to visit the last place the boys were seen," Clara replied. She had been rehearsing this scenario in her head for the past hour. "We need to see his reaction, watch his behavior." Robert nodded slowly. "And then we find a way to look around. The letter, the security footage, it all points to Ray knowing something he hasn't told us." As the GPS indicated they were getting closer, Clara's anxiety peaked. The country road narrowed, trees crowding closer on either side. They passed the faded sign for Millfield, the nearest town to Ray's farm, population 2,117, according to the peeling paint. "Almost there," Robert murmured, turning onto the gravel road that led to his brother's property. The farm appeared much as Clara remembered it. An old 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint, a large red barn in need of repair, and fields that seemed only partially tended. Ray's blue pickup was parked haphazardly near the front porch, confirming their suspicion that he had returned directly. Robert parked behind the truck, and they sat for a moment, gathering courage. "Remember," Clara said quietly, "we're just here to visit. We don't mention the letter or the camera footage." They approached the house cautiously. The porch steps creaked under their weight, a sound that transported Clara instantly back to that terrible day 3 years ago, when they had arrived to join the search parties. She had climbed these same steps, heard that same creak, her heart pounding with fear that now returned with full force. Robert knocked firmly on the door. There was no immediate response. He knocked again, louder this time. "Ray, it's Robert and Clara." Silence stretched. Then the sound of movement inside. The door opened slowly to reveal Raymond Matthews, looking older and more haggard than when they'd last seen him. His hair had grayed significantly, and his face was deeply lined, eyes bloodshot. "Robert," he said, his voice raspy. His gaze shifted to Clara, then quickly away. "Clara, what are you doing here?" "We were in the area," Robert said smoothly. "Thought we'd stop by. It's been a while." Ray hesitated visibly before stepping back. "Come in, then." The interior of the farmhouse was dimly lit and cluttered. Newspapers were stacked on various surfaces, unwashed dishes piled in the sink. The air smelled stale, with undertones of something Clara couldn't quite identify, something mechanical, like oil or gasoline. "Wasn't expecting company," Ray muttered, hastily clearing papers from the couch. "Can get you some coffee if you want." "That would be nice," Clara said, using the opportunity to scan the room. Nothing seemed immediately suspicious, just the home of a man living alone, neglecting basic housekeeping. As Ray disappeared into the kitchen, Robert leaned close to Clara. "He's nervous," he whispered. "Did you see his hands shaking?" Clara nodded. "And he can barely look at me." Ray returned with 3 mugs of coffee, setting them on the scarred coffee table. "So, just passing through?" he asked, settling into an armchair opposite them. "The anniversary is coming up," Clara said, watching him intently. 3 years next week. We thought we might see the place again." Ray's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. A tightening around the eyes, a slight flinch. "Not much to see," he said gruffly. "Nothing's changed." "Do you mind if we look around anyway?" Clara pressed. "Just to, I don't know, get some closure, maybe. I'll revise Chapter 4 to be approximately 4,000 characters while maintaining the story's integrity." Chapter 4. The Truth Unearthed. The trunk stood apart from the attic's ancient clutter, its wood relatively unmarked by time. Unlike the surrounding boxes coated in decades of dust, this one showed signs of more recent handling, finger smudges disrupting the fine layer of grime on its surface. "It has a padlock," Robert observed, crouching beside it. Clara knelt next to him, examining the lock. It was new, the metal still gleaming. "Can we break it open?" Robert hesitated. "If we do, Ray will know we've been searching." "I don't care anymore," Clara said, determination hardening her voice. "Our sons have been missing for 3 years. If there's even a chance this has something to do with them—" After a moment's consideration, Robert nodded. "Stand back." He located a rusted crowbar among the nearby tools and, with several forceful strikes, managed to break the lock's shackle. When no response came from downstairs, Robert carefully lifted the trunk's heavy lid. Inside were clothes. Boys' clothes in sizes that would fit children older than Lucas and Daniel had been when they disappeared. A red hoodie, jeans with distinctive patches on the knees. A blue t-shirt with a faded superhero logo that Lucas had always favored. "These are their clothes," Clara whispered, lifting the hoodie with trembling hands. "But bigger, newer." Robert rummaged deeper, pushing aside the clothing to reveal a stack of notebooks. He opened the top one, scanning pages filled with the same handwriting they had seen on the mysterious letter. "School assignments," he muttered, "dated last year." Clara was barely listening. Beneath the notebooks was a photo album. She pulled it out and opened it, her heart hammering against her ribs. The first image struck her like a physical blow. A photograph of Lucas and Daniel, clearly taken long after their disappearance. They were standing in front of an unfamiliar house, taller than she remembered, their faces thinner, their expressions serious. A date stamp indicated it had been taken just 7 months ago. "They're alive," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Robert, look, they're alive." A floorboard creaked below them, and they both froze. Footsteps moved across the house's main floor. Ray had returned. Clara quickly replaced the items in the trunk, keeping only the photo album and one of the notebooks. "We need to get these to the police," she whispered. They made their way down the ladder as quietly as possible. But as they reached the bottom, they came face to face with Ray, standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Robert stepped protectively in front of Clara. "Where are they, Ray?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Ray replied. But his eyes flicked to the items in Clara's arms. "Don't lie to us," Clara said, her voice shaking with fury. "We found their clothes, their schoolwork, photos. What did you do to our sons?" Ray's facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand," he began, then stopped as the sound of a vehicle approaching reached them through the open window. "That'll be Sheriff Donovan," Robert bluffed. "We called him before we came in. Told him about the letter you left at our door." Ray's face drained of color. "You need to leave. Now. Both of you." His voice had changed, urgent rather than threatening. "It's not safe. We're not going anywhere without answers," Clara insisted, even as confusion began to mingle with her anger. "You got my warning," Ray said quietly. "I told you not to trust him." The realization hit Clara. The letter, that was you warning us about someone else. Before Ray could respond, car doors slammed outside. Ray moved to the window, peering out. What little color remained in his face vanished. "Back door, now," he ordered. "Go to the barn. There's a hidden cellar beneath the north wall. The boys are there." "What?" Clara gasped. "No time," Ray hissed, pushing them toward the kitchen. "I'll hold him off. Go." As they reached the kitchen door, heavy knocking sounded from the front entrance. "It's not the police," Ray said grimly. "It's him, the reason your boys disappeared, the reason I had to hide them." "Who?" Robert demanded. Martin Blackwood, my former commanding officer, the man who's been hunting them and me for 3 years. A crash indicated the front door being forced open. Ray pushed them out the back. Run! They fled across the yard toward the barn, Clara's mind spinning with questions. Inside, Robert frantically searched the north wall, pushing aside old farm equipment. Here! He called, discovering a trapdoor concealed beneath hay. He wrenched it open to reveal a ladder descending into darkness. Clara went first, clutching the photo album as she climbed down. The space below was surprisingly large, a bunker-like room with concrete walls, basic furnishings, and a battery-powered lamp that cast a warm glow. And there, huddled in the far corner, were 2 boys who had grown taller, but whose faces she would recognize anywhere. "Mom," the taller one whispered, disbelief in his voice. Clara rushed forward, gathering both boys into her arms, sobs racking her body. Lucas and Daniel clung to her, their own tears flowing freely after 3 years of separation. Above them, the sound of voices, Ray's rising in what seemed like warning. Another deeper commanding, then silence, followed by heavy footsteps moving toward the barn. "He found us," Daniel whispered, terror in his voice. "He always finds us." Robert pulled an old metal shelf in front of the trapdoor. "Who is he? Why is he after you?" "Because of what we saw," Lucas explained quickly. "At the base where Uncle Ray worked. We weren't supposed to be there that day, but we wandered away from the visitor area and saw them testing something they said didn't exist." "We have to go," Daniel urged. "There's another way out, through the old drainage tunnel. Uncle Ray showed us." As the family hurried toward the hidden exit, Clara's mind raced with the implications. A government cover-up, a military experiment. Her brother-in-law, not a kidnapper, but a protector. The truth had been closer and more complicated than she could have imagined. And now, at last, they were together again, running, but together.